He opened fire on his family for making him wash the dishes. 32-year-old Gerardo Jimenez Rico lived with his family in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. On January 22nd of 2025, Gerardo's family had just came back from a trip from Mexico. Gerardo stayed home because he couldn't afford the trip since he didn't work. Once his family arrived home, a fight began over some dirty dishes in the sink. Gerardo's father told him that he needed to move out of the home and get a job. His sister, 22-year-old Jocelyn, is siding with her father and starts yelling at Gerardo. With all of his family members ganging up on him about these dirty dishes, he felt fed up and he snapped. That's when Gerardo grabbed a gun and shot his father. Jocelyn grabs a kitchen knife to defend herself, but then Gerardo shoots her and ends her life. His mom enters the room and then moments later he shoots her as well. Once he did this, he had quickly fled the scene. Police were called, and when they arrived at the home, Jocelyn was found deceased and both parents were alive but critically wounded. Jocelyn left behind her 3-year-old daughter and her fiancé, whom she loved very much. She had dreams of becoming a nurse and owning a cake business, but unfortunately that was taken from her. Hours later, Gerardo walks to the police station and confesses to shooting his family. He told investigators that his family had bullied him for years because of his unemployment, and the argument about the dirty dishes was just his breaking point. On June 24th of 2025, Gerardo was arrested and he pled guilty and was sentenced to 35 years in prison and 19 years of supervised release.
She's just mysteriously died on a cruise ship. Why does this keep happening? Anna Kepner was a high school senior. She went to Temple Christian School in Titusville in Florida, and she was super popular. She was a great gymnast and she was part of the cheerleading squad. She was such a funny girl. She was very energetic. She was always posting videos and trying to make people laugh. And she'd just gone on a family holiday on a cruise on a Carnival ship with her family. It was supposed to be heading to the Caribbean and everybody was really looking forward to it. After this holiday, she was planning to go into the military. She was a straight A student and she was incredibly career focused. She knew what she wanted to do. She'd been working so hard and clearly deserved a break. But while on that cruise, she was mysteriously found dead inside of a room. Now that's all we're being told at this point, and her family are honestly just as clueless as the rest of us. The official documents state that her time of death was 11:17 a.m. on the 7th of November. After her death was discovered, the ship then went back to Miami and the FBI got involved. The whole family has been interviewed, including her young siblings, and apparently her dad has now spoken out. He was on the cruise with her and even he said he has no idea what happened to his daughter. What we do know is apparently this was absolutely no accident. That's what they're led to believe. It's being called a mysterious death, so I'm guessing we'll find out more as things unfold. It does seem that the FBI got involved because this all happened in international waters. Apparently that's a very common thing.
She is Denmark's most infamous killer nurse. Between the likes of Lucy Letby and Beverly Allitt, it is absolutely horrifying just how many murderous nurses there are out there. I'm True Crime Caitlin, and this is the case of Christina Ainstrup Hansen. Pernille Kurzman was bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, fresh out of university, ready to begin her dream career in nursing. She found a job within a busy A&E department in a hospital in southern Denmark, where she would quickly make friends with all of her colleagues, including Christina Hansen. Christina was considered to be one of the best nurses in the hospital. They thought that she was fantastic. She was very well regarded by all of her colleagues. They described her as funny, charismatic, and all around she was very well liked. Unbeknownst to Christina and the people that surrounded her, she suffered with histrionic personality disorder. The definition of that is, quote, "For people with histrionic personality disorder, their self-esteem depends on the approval of others and doesn't come from a true feeling of self-worth. They have an overwhelming desire to be noticed and often behave dramatically or inappropriately to get attention." Christina craved attention so much that when she was working, usually when she was on night shift, she would administer lethal amounts of morphine and diazepam to some of her patients to either make them go into cardiac arrest or make them fall incredibly ill so that she could save them, resurrect them, and she would be branded the hero, a brilliant nurse, a lifesaver. She absolutely thrived off of that praise. However, for at least 3 patients, they would die after being spiked with the drugs. After working with Christina for a very short amount of time, Pernille began to notice that something wasn't right. Patients would die more around Christina than they would around other nurses. In March 2015, she reported her suspicions to the police, and after she made this report, other colleagues within the hospital also came forward with their suspicions regarding Christina. It took the youngest and the newest nurse to speak up for anything to be done about these suspicions. Christina would be arrested and charged with 3 counts of murder. After an over 1-month trial which saw 70 witnesses testify, she would be convicted of all 3 counts of murder and an additional count of attempted murder. She was also convicted of drugging her 7-year-old daughter with extremely strong sleeping medication, which was only meant for adults. The murder charges were appealed to the High Court, who actually ruled in Christina's favour and commuted them down to manslaughter. This was because they couldn't prove that it was the drugs that contributed towards the patient's deaths. Side note, the patients had also been cremated, so there was no way that they could go back and do another autopsy on them. Christina was handed a sentence of 12 years to serve in 2017, meaning that she will be released by 2029.
He ended his 5-year-old son's life because he ate his cheesecake. 29-year-old Travis Stackhouse lived in Milwaukee, Wisconsin with his girlfriend and 5 children. On June 22nd of 2019, it was Father's Day weekend and the family got Travis a cheesecake to celebrate. Travis only got a slice and noticed that his children were eating the rest of the cheesecake, including his 5-year-old son, Sir Amer. When he saw this, he became enraged because he felt like this cheesecake was just for him, so he punched his son in the stomach. But that wasn't enough for him, so he hit him in the face with the back of his hand that contained a metal implant. Eventually, 5-year-old Sir Amer became unresponsive, and instead of Travis calling 911 right away, he went out to a bar with his friends. Eventually, the family called for help and the police arrived at the home. At first, Travis claimed that his son fell down the stairs, but once an autopsy was done, it was a completely different story. The autopsy revealed that Sir Amer had a ruptured stomach, torn adrenal gland, and bruised kidneys. Once this was revealed, Travis broke down and confessed. He admitted to punching his son and claimed that he did this because he was so upset over the cheesecake. Travis was arrested, and as part of the plea deal, he pled guilty to second-degree reckless homicide, child abuse, and child neglect. He was sentenced to 28 years, so 20 years in prison and 8 years of extended supervision.
He was on the phone with his parents, calmly describing what he saw until he suddenly gasped, "Oh shit!" 19-year-old Brandon had just finished his first semester at college. That night, he went out to celebrate with his friends at a party. He had a beer or 2, but his friend said he was not drunk. At around midnight, Brandon left and drove to another party in Canberra, about 30 miles away. There, he had 1 shot of whiskey before deciding, I want to go home. Brandon had driven this highway multiple times every day to go to school, but that night, for some unknown reason, he took back roads. Around 2 a.m. while driving, Brandon's car swerved off the road and got stuck in a ditch. He wasn't injured, so he didn't panic. He simply called his parents and asked, "Hey, can you come pick me up?" He gave them specific directions to where he was. Both Brandon and his parents agreed to flash their headlights so they can spot each other. They flashed theirs. He flashed his. And on the phone, he said, "Hey, can you see me?" They both were honking their horns, but somehow, even though they said they were exactly where he said he was, they couldn't find him. At this point, Brandon was frustrated. He told his parents he just walked towards town and meet them at a well-known nightclub in Lynn. He stayed on the phone with them the entire time. For 47 minutes, he described everything around him: a couple of fences, a gravel road, and the sound of running water. In the middle of calmly talking with his parents, Brandon suddenly screamed, "Oh shit!" and the line went silent. His parents freaked out. They are calling him over and over, but there is no answer. They're driving up and down the highway, searching desperately for their now missing son. There was no sign of him anywhere. So at 6:30 a.m., they called the police, hoping that they would find their son. Officers told them, "He's 19. He has a right to be missing." And by the time police started doing their jobs, they pulled Brandon's phone records. Come to find out that he wasn't near Lind at all. His last known location was 25 miles away, and they found his car abandoned on a gravel road miles from where he said he was. The keys were gone. His glasses were left behind, and here's why that's weird. Brandon was legally blind in one eye. Search dogs picked up his scent leading down County Road 16 and toward Medicine River. The river was searched for 30 days. Police believe that when he screamed, "Oh shit," maybe he slipped and fell into the river. And at first, that theory makes sense. Brandon did tell his parents that he heard running water. It was pitch dark outside, he didn't have his glasses, and the water was really deep. My theory is, I think that Brandon was unfortunately intoxicated. I know his friends say that he wasn't, but I mean, why would they throw him under the bus to the cops? He most likely took a back road to avoid being stopped from the cops since he was driving under the influence. It's the only thing that explains why he swerved and got stuck in a ditch and left his glasses behind. But the one question that I cannot answer is, Where is his body?
He could be one of America's deadliest serial killers. After sitting on death row for 30 years, he is set to be executed in just a couple of hours. I'm True Crime Caitlin, and this is the case of serial killer Glenn Rogers, also known as the cross-country killer. Glenn Rogers originated from Ohio, and he was one of 7 children. By the time he was 16, he was already kicked out of school for bad behaviour, and around about this time he also got his 14-year-old girlfriend pregnant. The couple would go on to get married and had another child together, however their relationship didn't make it past the 5-year mark. This is because Glenn was very abusive towards his wife. He was an angry man who had a fiery temper which only accelerated when he drank alcohol. From the outside, Glenn could appear very alluring, charming, nice, and some people even considered him very attractive. It would be these traits that he would use to lure some of his victims. Sandra Gallagher was a mother of 3 who was going through a pretty rocky time in her life. She and her husband were currently separated. They had been separated for a very short amount of time because he was abusive towards her. With her newfound freedom, she decided that she wanted to start visiting all of the local bars in Los Angeles. On the 28th of September 1995, Sandra met up with her husband for a lunch date. They were going to try and reconcile and work things out, however it didn't go to plan. The final time that her husband would ever hear from Sandra would be later that night. She had rang him from a bar because she was very excited. She had just won a good chunk of money on a lottery ticket. It was around about $1,200. While inside the bar, Sandra got chatting to Glenn Rogers, and once the bar closed, they both left together, Glenn jumping into Sandra's truck. They would end up in the car park of a nearby hospital where it is presumed that Glenn made some sort of unwanted sexual advance towards Sandra, which she declined. Drunk and furious at this refusal, Glenn would wrap his hands around Sandra's throat, strangling her, squeezing so tight that he crushed her windpipe and killed her. After that, he doused the entire truck and Sandra's body in petrol before setting it on fire and fleeing as the truck became engulfed in flames. Emergency services were called quite quickly after the truck was set on fire, and investigators would eventually find themselves at the bar where Sandra and Glenn were drinking. Many witnesses recalled seeing Sandra with a man who had long blonde hair, and they also recalled that his name was Glenn Rogers. By the time officers arrived at his apartment with a search warrant, he was already long gone. A warrant for his arrest was issued, and all of the details of the murder was uploaded to the national database. This meant that other police departments would be able to look at the information if they searched up Glenn's name. Over a month later, on the 3rd of November, police in Jackson, Mississippi would receive a horrifying phone call. The family of 34-year-old Linda Price discovered her body dead in her own home. She was found lay in the bath and had been repeatedly stabbed, along with having her throat slit. When investigators arrived and began to process the scene, they couldn't find the murder weapon. They concluded that nothing of value was stolen, and it also appeared that there had been no forced entry. This led them to believe that Linda was murdered by someone that she knew or someone she let into her home. When her mother was interviewed, she told the police about Linda's new boyfriend, Glenn Rogers. They had met at the state fair and had been dating for around about a month. Glenn had moved in with Linda, and initially the relationship was going well. However, more recently, Linda grew scared of Glenn because of his violence. When the police in Jackson, Mississippi searched his name up on the database, they were able to see that he was wanted in connection with another murder in LA, and so they reached out to the police in LA to share what they knew and try and catch Glenn, but they were already too late. Tina Marie Cribbs was on a night out in Florida with her besties when she got chatting to a man in one of the bars. The girls were a little bit giddy over him because of his long blonde hair and his striking blue eyes, and as you've guessed, that man was Glenn Rogers. They would spend all night dancing, flirting, getting to know each other, and Glenn would pay for all of their drinks using $100 bills. Tina was supposed to be meeting her mum at the bar that night. However, when Glenn asked if she could take him home, back to his motel room, she accepted and told the girls that she would give them all of the details tomorrow. But she would never make it back to the bar to meet her mother. On the 6th of November, so this is 3 days after the discovery of Linda's his body, a cleaner working at the motel where Glenn was staying let herself into Glenn's room, and she would discover the body of Tina. She was found in the bath suffering from extensive stab wounds to her chest, back and her wrists, which indicated that she had fought for her life against her attacker. The stabs were determined to have been done on top of her clothes and were done from behind, so Glenn had creeped up behind her and started to stab her out of nowhere. By the time police arrived, Glenn had already taken off in Tina's white car. Once again, when they input his name into the database, they could see that he was wanted in connection with 2 other murders. One thing that was noted about Glenn is that he didn't seem to try and conceal his identity. He would check into motels under his own name, he would tell people his name, he would sign things with his name. On the 10th of November, police in Bossier City, Louisiana would receive a distressing phone call. The roommate of a woman named Andy Sutton had discovered Andy's body in her bedroom. Andy's ex-boyfriend had turned up at their shared apartment on that morning and told the roommate that he wanted to see Andy because they had broken up and he wanted to reconcile. The roommate and Andy's ex-boyfriend both went to the bedroom, and that is when they discovered her body. Of course, that was already suspicious. However, when the roommate told the police about this man that Andy had been having a fling with named Glenn Rogers, who she had only known for a couple of days, they put his name into the police database. They knew that this was the man that they were looking for. And of course, that man was Glenn Rogers. Andy and Glenn had met in a bar only a couple of days prior before Glenn viciously stabbed her to death in a frenzy in her own bedroom. Some of the wounds looked absolutely horrific, as if he had twisted the knife as he had been stabbing her. It was determined that she could have been alive up to an hour after being stabbed. By now, all of these police departments were working together to try and catch Glenn, who always seemed to be one step ahead of them. They enlisted the help of the FBI, who uploaded him to their most wanted list, and his name and face were blasted all over the country. On the 13th of November, police began to close in on Glenn. He had been to visit one of his family members in Kentucky, and as soon as he left, they contacted the police and reported him, what he was wearing and what car he was driving. The police found him and pursued him, Glenn leading them on a 13-mile-long high-speed chase. Officers even set up roadblocks to try and stop him, but he just drove straight through them. Eventually, they had to run him off of the road in order to capture him and arrest him. Together, all of the agencies decided that the best case to charge him with and to try him with would be the murder of Tina Marie Cribbs. There was simply more evidence against him. He was captured still driving her car. Search of the car would uncover a pair of bloody shorts which had Tina's DNA on them, and he also had items that linked him to each and every victim. Despite the cases that I just relayed onto you there are other cases that Glenn is thought to be involved in. This included the suspicious death of one of his roommates years before. In 1994, 71-year-old Mark Peters was renting a room alongside Glenn inside of one of Glenn's family cabins. Mark would be found dead under suspicious circumstances, and when he was found, he was bound by his wrists and his ankles. Glenn also told the police that he was responsible for up to 70 murders, although he later denied that, saying he was only joking. At trial, Glenn Rogers would be found guilty of the murder of Tina Marie Cribbs, and he was handed the death penalty. He is set to be executed in Florida in just a couple of hours' time. His solicitors tried to get the execution stopped because of some sort of condition that Glenn has. This means that one of the drugs that is going to be administered to him will cause him excruciating pain.
This little boy was beaten, starved, and stuffed in a box, and for 65 years he had no real name other than the boy in the box. It's 1957. A man is walking through the woods. He spots something, a cardboard box. He peeks inside the box and his heart drops because inside is a little boy, a dead little boy to be specific. He's naked, covered in bruises, old ones and new ones, scars on his groin, his ankles, an L-shaped scar underneath his chin. His ribs were sticking out like he hadn't eaten in days. His tiny arms and legs looked wrinkled, like someone kept him in water for hours before stuffing him in that box. And whoever did this tried to clean him up because his nails were trimmed and his hair was freshly cut, but clumps of it were still stuck to his skin. But then the man who found him walks away without telling anyone. Days later, a college student finds the box. This time, he calls 911. Police show up, and it was pretty obvious that this wasn't an accident. Some evil maniac murdered this little boy. Police were sure it'd be easy to find his boy's identity. I mean, how could no one be looking for this child? Then days passed, then weeks, then months, and no one came forward. They searched everywhere: schools, orphanages, missing persons reports, but nothing. The only clues they had were a blue corduroy cap, a child's scarf, a man's handkerchief with the letter G, but these clues also led nowhere. And so after months of searching, the boy in the box was buried. The saddest part is, on his gravestone, they wrote, "Heavenly Father, bless this unknown boy." Then one day, after years, a woman named Martha comes forward with a story. And her story is honestly horrifying. A lot worse than I would have expected. She says her parents purchased him from his birth family. They locked him in the basement like a prisoner. They starved him, beat him, enslaved him, and abused him until one night he throws up in the tub and her mother snapped. In a fit of rage, she slammed his head against the wall and him. Then she cut his hair, cleaned him up, and dumped him in the box. And because the story matched with all the injuries, police believed her. But there was one problem. Martha had a history of severe mental issues. She was kind of crazy. So they could never prove if her story was true. So once again, the case went cold. But then in 2022, 65 years later, technology got better and DNA finally identified him. His name was Joseph Augustus Sorelli, and he was only 4 years old. And police even found his parents too, but they refused to release their names. All they said was that both his parents were dead. But I still have so many questions. Who killed him? Why was he dumped inside of that box? Did his parents do it? So many questions I need to know, but what do you think happened? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to see what you guys say, but as always, stay safe. Love y'all.
This is the story of Christopher Thompson. March 13th, 2020, Paula Thompson called the police on her son, Christopher Thompson, because he was banging on the door. He was being belligerent and he was also intoxicated. She refused to let him in. On the 911 call, you can actually hear Christopher banging and asking his mother to let him in. He also did not believe that she was actually calling the cops. But when the police arrived, Christopher was gone. The police told Paula, do not let him in if he comes back, and also call his probation officer if he's been drinking. They also told her to put her phone on record and call them back if he returns. Christopher returned home that night and Paula let him in. The two started drinking and got into a heated argument about Christopher not being able to hold down a job. While Paula is fussing at him, Christopher is becoming more mad. He was so enraged that he picked up the crowbar and hit his mother over the head with it. He beat his mother so bad she lost parts of her skull. After he seen that his mother was deceased, Christopher sat down and started to watch TV until he decided to get up and drag his mother to her room and shut her door. Over the course of 5 days, Christopher lived a normal life in this house with his dead mother. He went back and forth to the liquor store. He watched TV. He even played video games until March 18th, 2020, Paula's coworker and friend called to check on her because not only haven't Paula been to work, her friend hasn't physically talked to her either. She tried to call a few times before, but Christopher kept giving her a runaround and telling her that his mother was sick. But the walls were closing in on Chris. The friend was demanding to speak to her. He had no choice but to confess. He told his mother's friend that he killed her, and he just hung up. Paula's friend immediately called the police, and when they arrived, Christopher was nowhere to be found, but the front door was cracked, and that's where they found Paula deceased in her bedroom. They were looking for Christopher for about 3 hours, and he turned up at the police station to turn himself in. They asked him where did he go, and he said he went to Walmart to get some popcorn chicken, and he sat in the parking lot and ate it. During interrogation, the police asked Christopher why did he kill his mother, and he said because she was nagging about his life and that everything in that house belonged to her, and she reminded him of that. I mean, did she lie? The police also questioned Paula's friend. She told them that he could never keep a job and that he stayed drunk, and he also has a criminal background. But she also asked the police about a cat, a rescue cat her and Paula had, but Paula was keeping the cat. The police asked Christopher about the cat, like, where is the cat? He said he broke the cat in half and also beat the cat with the crowbar and threw the cat away in the trash. His past convictions: Christopher was living with a friend and a friend asked him to wash the dishes, and he didn't want to, so he decided to run them over with a car. He was also living with another friend, and that friend asked him to get out, and he tried to stab him. Christopher sounds like a man-child who throws tantrums when he does not get his way. December of 2020, they sentenced Christopher Thompson to life. And he deserves it. Anybody who can spend 5 days in a house with their dead mother, keep him in there.
The perfect mother that unalived her 5 children. To say that there were red flags about what was going to happen in this case would be a massive understatement, and believe it or not, it's actually extremely controversial, so I'm going to be interested to read all of your guys' opinions on it. Andrea was like the perfect child. She never gave her parents any trouble. They were a religious family, but Andrea seemed to thrive in the church. Andrea was an overachiever, very smart. She was actually valedictorian of her class and went on to be a very successful nurse. She met Rusty Yates, who would be her husband. He was a young man who was also very religious. He was also very smart, top of his class, and a successful engineer for NASA. They seemed like the perfect match. Family and religion were both top priorities for Andrea and Rusty. They really wanted a big family, and they had their first child, Noah, only 2 months after tying the knot, and Andrea and Rusty really were popping out kids. They had 4 kids by 1999, all under the age of 6 years old. 4 under 6. Their sons' names were Noah, John, Paul, and Luke, all named after people in the Bible because religion, very important to them. They were truly living the golden life, big, beautiful family, big, beautiful house, and they were well off financially, enough that Andrea was able to quit her job and be a stay-at-home mom, but she didn't seem to mind. She loved her kids. Everyone said that she was super mom, and her kids were stuck to her like glue. Andrea and Rusty were also friends with this other married couple, and yeah, Andrea and Rusty were really religious, but this married couple took it to like a whole other extreme, and they also seemed to be jealous of Rusty's money and his success, and they put a lot of judgment and pressure on Andrea for it, and this is where we see the first signs of trouble. Andrea began to experience severe religious anxiety. At this point, Rusty had kind of cut off that married couple because they were honestly kind of a-holes, but they continued to belittle and put pressure and judgment on Andrea, and were literally telling her because of her choices as a mother and a wife, her entire family would burn in HE double hockey stick for eternity. Andrea's anxiety actually got so bad that her and Rusty sold their big, beautiful home and bought this tiny 300 square foot trailer because they felt like the house was a sign of pride, which was a sin. But it was at this time that Andrea had their 4th son, Luke, so she's all alone with 4 toddlers in this teeny tiny trailer on top of experiencing severe anxiety, and she was definitely suffering. But everyone thought that she was super mom, so they didn't understand why Andrea was so blue. Because at this point in the 90s and early 2000s, mental health, like awareness and education, isn't what we have today by any means. Most people had never even heard of the term postpartum depression before, and if you were feeling like depressed, the overall consensus was that you just have to deal with it on your own. Just like stop being sad. So it was around this time that Andrea actually attempted to unalive herself, and she was hospitalized. This is when she was first officially diagnosed with postpartum depression. Unfortunately, she was discharged only a couple days later from the hospital despite making no improvement, and she attempted her life again, so she was hospitalized for a second time. It was at this hospital that Andrea first really got to speak with a psychologist and really open up about her fears, and also the fact that she was experiencing like delusions at this point. She was convinced that the devil was inside of her and the devil wanted her children and that they were going to burn for eternity because she was such a bad mom. So this is when Andrea was also diagnosed with postpartum psychosis,
which is a lot different than postpartum depression, and it's a medical emergency and puts far more risk on the parents and the children than just having postpartum depression. It was here that Andrea was being medicated, and she was actually improving a lot. Only after a couple of days, Rusty said that it was like he had his wife back pretty much overnight. I mean, Andrea did a complete 180. Everyone that knew Rusty and Andrea at the time said that Rusty was being extremely supportive and attentive. He even sold their little trailer and bought a bigger home, so when she was released from the hospital, that she would have some more room to breathe. But unfortunately, even decent people make really, really terrible mistakes. Andrea was set to be released from the hospital again on 2 conditions. 1, she had to keep taking her medication, and 2, she absolutely had to stop having children or she would definitely have another psychotic break. Well, within 2 months, not only was Andrea off the medication, but she was pregnant again. Andrea was pregnant with her and Rusty's 5th baby, a little girl named Mary, and Andrea's mental health continued to improve up until the day pretty much that Mary was born. Not only was Andrea in that dark place again, but it was even worse. Andrea wasn't eating, she wasn't sleeping, she was in almost a catatonic state. It was like zombie-like, and she wouldn't care for little baby Mary no matter how much Mary cried. So Rusty had Andrea hospitalized again, but they discharged her after only 10 days, which was really confusing and frustrating for Rusty. I mean, he had a full-time job and 5 kids at home, and the only advice that they gave him was to make sure that Andrea was being supervised 24/7. So if she needs to be supervised 24/7, why not just keep her in the hospital? Like, why discharge her? It doesn't make sense at all. That's what Rusty did. He was with his wife, Andrea, constantly, and when he had to go to work, his mother would come over and be with Andrea and watch the kids, but Andrea continued to deteriorate. She wasn't eating, she wasn't sleeping, she would just stare aimlessly for hours. So Andrea was hospitalized a final time, but to Rusty's growing frustration, they discharged her after 2 weeks despite showing 0 improvement. Only a few days later, the worst possible thing happened. It was June 20th, 2001. Rusty had to go to work, and he had made the decision that day to leave Andrea home alone with the kids for 1 hour before his mother was set to arrive. His thought process was if he let Andrea have these tiny windows where she could be independent, that it would help in her recovery. I mean, they tried so many things before, and Andrea seemed really, really good that morning. I mean, she was eating, which was an improvement, but it would prove to be a really terrible, tragic decision on Rusty's part. Pretty much as soon as Rusty left for work, Andrea went and ran a bath, and then she brought her children in one by one and unalived them in the bathtub. 7-year-old Noah, 5-year-old John, 3-year-old Paul, 2-year-old Luke, and 6-month-old Mary. Andrea didn't even try to cover up her crime. She immediately called 911 and then called her husband Rusty to come home. Every psychiatrist that has ever spoken with Andrea Yates says that she is the sickest patient they've ever seen in their entire careers. Turns out for years, Andrea was suffering with severe delusions. She thought the devil was inside of her. The devil wanted her kids. She would have these really realistic delusions where she says that she saw all of her children burning in HE double hockey stick. And she truly believed that her children would suffer for eternity if they didn't go to heaven when they were still innocent. Andrea Yates really wanted the death penalty and was really confused why they would not give it to her. She had 2 trials, one where she was found guilty and sentenced to life, and then she was retried where she was found not guilty by reason of insanity. She's currently in a mental hospital. She has been given the opportunity multiple times to be possibly released, but she is denied all of them. She does not want to be released. Rusty supported Andrea the entire time. He still visits her to this day, even though he has remarried and has another child. I'm really, really interested to get your guys' opinion on this case. Do you think Andrea Yates is a villain or a victim or a little bit of both? And how much fault should lie on Rusty? This is truly the most conflicted I've ever felt while covering a true crime case. I mean, on one hand, what Andrea Yates went through was truly terrible, but what she ended up doing was even worse. I mean, we have 5 young babies who lost their lives in one of the most terrible and terrifying ways at the hands of their own mother. I couldn't even begin to imagine how terrified they were. It is important to note, though, that for years, Andrea Yates was asking for help. And I mean, her actions alone were a scream for help. So I do believe that her and her children were failed. It does show that mental health is so important. And I truly hope everyone that watches this does focus on your own mental health, and also if someone you know is suffering with theirs, to get them help and be there for them, because I mean, this case did not need to happen. If you watched the end of this video, thank you so much, because I know it was not easy to get through. I'm in the same boat. Those 5 little babies will be in my thoughts for a very, very long time. I'm going to be reading all of your guys' opinions and thoughts in the comments. I'm definitely really interested to get your guys' take on this terrible, tragic, senseless case. And please be respectful of each other's opinions, because I truly do not think there's a wrong opinion in this super conflicting and controversial case. And I will see you guys tomorrow. Love you.
1 minute you're dancing at a VIP party, the next bodies are flying through the air. It was summer 1981 in Kansas City, Missouri. A massive hotel had just been built and it was creating a real buzz in the local area. Everyone was desperate to get a glimpse inside. And they were in luck, because the Hyatt Regency Hotel was opening its doors for this lavish event. It was going to be music, cocktails, dancing, all in this brand new atrium, which was super impressive to look at. One of the main real focal points of the hotel were the new walkways. Now, these were essentially like bridges that kind of hung above the dance floor. Think kind of balcony vibes. That particular evening, hundreds of guests were packed inside, drinking and dancing and just enjoying themselves. And all of a sudden, all hell broke loose. In a split second, one of the walkways, which was suspended 4 floors in the air, crashed to the ground. It was absolute mayhem. This walkway then tore down another walkway which was kind of attached to it. It just plunged down below onto the people on the dance floor. Sounded like a bomb had gone off. Literally, people were either screaming in sheer terror or agony. There were instantly dead bodies everywhere. The survivors, if they were able to run, if they still had both of their legs, were having to run over body parts scattered all over the floor. Some people who were still hanging on to life were trapped under steel beams. Obviously, emergency services raced over there, but they had this absolutely impossible task. The large majority of people were trapped and there was no way to safely remove them from underneath these huge beams. One of the most chilling and horrific parts of this crime case for me is the fact that the paramedics had to say to people, look, you either let us amputate your limbs right now without any anesthetic, or you are trapped here and you will certainly die an agonizing death. How do you make that decision? There was dust and bodies everywhere and the paramedics were having to literally perform like emergency surgery. In total, 144 people were killed. Over 200 people were injured in this tragedy, and I'm going to guess pretty much all of them were absolutely traumatized by what they saw that day. Emergency services had to work through the night to risk their own lives searching through the rubble. It was called one of the worst engineering-caused disasters in US history, and it was literally caused by a design fault that had just been overlooked. People were obviously outraged, rightly so, and millions had to be paid out in settlements, but it will never bring back those deceased victims.
This 15-year-old girl is a terrifying killer that bragged about what she did in her diary. Alyssa Bustamante was literally born into chaos and trouble. Her parents were literally cousins that got pregnant with Alyssa when they were only teenagers themselves. They were both substance users. Her mom was neglectful. Her dad was abusive. When Alyssa was 9 years old, her dad was in prison and her mom was just high all of the time. So she was actually removed out of the home with her 3 younger siblings and placed in the custody of her grandparents. Her grandparents really wanted to give these kids like a good fresh start. So they moved them from California to a small town in Missouri called St. Martin's. But at that point, it was almost too late for Alyssa. Alyssa was only 9 years old, but she was in serious need of some therapy. She was super hateful and aggressive and angry and violent. And the older Alyssa got, the more she rebelled. She started dressing in like an emo aesthetic. She was posting some like really disturbing things on MySpace, which was like the popular social media at the time. It could have all been a cry for help. I mean, like on one hand, having really strong emotions as a teenage girl, Alyssa is like 14, 15 at this point, that's normal. But what isn't normal is around this time, Alyssa started to tell her friends that she was fantasizing about what it would be like to unalive someone. And then tragically, on October 21st, 2009, Alyssa made those dark, twisted fantasies come true. That was the day that Alyssa planned that she was going to take someone's life. Early in the day, Alyssa went into the wooden area behind her home and dug a hole that would serve as a grave for her victim. Then, as it started to get dark out, Alyssa's twisted plan went into effect. Alyssa, who remembers only 15 years old at the time, brought her 6-year-old sister Emma out to play. Alyssa then instructed her 6-year-old sister Emma to go 4 houses down and invite their 9-year-old neighbor Elizabeth Olton out to play. Little 6-year-old Emma was so young and naive, she probably thought that it was cool that her older sister wanted to play with her and her friend Elizabeth. I mean, Alyssa was always kind of mean and kind of abusive towards Emma, and now she wanted to play with her. Emma had no idea that what she was actually doing was luring one of her best friends to be brutally unalived by her own big sister. Elizabeth Olton's mother didn't even want Elizabeth to go out to play because they were about to settle down for dinner. But you know how little girls are, they were really persistent about wanting to play together. So eventually, Elizabeth's mother reluctantly agreed as long as she would be back in 1 hour for dinner. But tragically, little 9-year-old Elizabeth Olton would never make it back home. When Elizabeth and Emma came running, back to Alyssa and Emma's home to play with Alyssa, Alyssa immediately ordered Emma to go home, and then she lured little Elizabeth into the woods where she had dug her grave a couple hours earlier. And that is where 15-year-old Alyssa Bustamante brutally unalived 9-year-old Elizabeth Olton. What Alyssa had just done seemed to barely even faze her. She excitedly ran home and wrote about it in her diary. I'm gonna put what Alyssa wrote in her diary on the screen now. She describes what she had just done moments earlier to this little 9-year-old girl that she knew. It was one of her sister's best friends. They played together all the time. Elizabeth only lived 4 houses down. And then after she wrote what she did to her, she wrote, "I don't know how to feel at the moment. It was amazing. As soon as you get over the, oh my God, I can't do this feeling, it's pretty enjoyable. I'm kind of nervous and shaky though right now. Okay, I gotta go to church now. LOL." There aren't even words to describe that. It's horrifying and disgusting. When Elizabeth never made it home at 6 p.m. for dinner, her mom immediately knew that something terrible happened. And within 24 hours, the investigators learned that the last person to be seen with 9-year-old Elizabeth was her 15-year-old neighbor. The investigators searched Alyssa's room while she was at school. They told, her parents that I think that she was just a witness at that point. And that is when they found Alyssa's diary. And it was full of really, really dark and disturbing entries. But the investigators were most interested about the diary entry that was made on the day that Elizabeth went missing. And they saw that it had been completely scribbled over in pen to hide what Alyssa had written that day. They were able to recover what had been written before it was scribbled over, and that was the entry I just read to you. And that is when Alyssa was finally brought into questioning for the disappearance and possible unaliving of Elizabeth Olton. I truly think that Alyssa thought that she was smart and covered her tracks and that she was going to get away with it. She seemed not nervous at all being questioned by these detectives until they mentioned her diary. And that is when her story completely changed from I have no idea what happened to yes, I was playing with Elizabeth. We were playing in the woods and Elizabeth had accidentally fallen, hit in her head, and passed away. And that is when the investigators asked Alyssa one more question. And Alyssa's response to that question completely broke her grandmother, who was in the room. I mean, this poor woman, she thought that she was only bringing her granddaughter in as a witness. She had no idea what her granddaughter could be capable of. She thought that this was the little girl that she had saved. And to learn that she was the reason why their little missing neighbor was missing, it completely broke her, and I'll show you that footage now.
How did she die? 9-year-old girls don't just die.
She fell back and hit her head.
Was her throat cut?
Yeah. Oh my God.
That is when Alyssa made a full confession and she was sentenced to life in prison. But if you think that's where this case ends, you are sadly mistaken, because there's a really, really recent, disturbing, dark update in this case. But before I get into that disgusting update, I do want to take a moment to talk about Elizabeth and the other people that were affected in this case. I cannot stop thinking about Elizabeth's poor mother and Alyssa's little sister. I couldn't even begin to imagine the regret and the guilt. I mean, Elizabeth's mother didn't even want her to go out to play that day. And then Alyssa's little sister, she was only 6, and she was the one used to lure her friend to be unalived. She would be about 21 years old now, and both of them, everyone affected in this case, are definitely in my thoughts. I'm completely heartbroken for both of them, and I hope everyone in this case knows that it's not their fault. The only person at fault here is, of course, Alyssa Bustamante. Elizabeth Olten was only 9 years old when her life was stolen from her in the most terrible and terrifying way. This was a little girl who loved animals and music. She was a huge Taylor Swift and Hannah Montana fan. And, she was really excited at the time, and her only big worry was that she had just scored a lead in the school musical. And then her life was just stolen from her in such a senseless, terrifying way. It's in remembrance for the way that Elizabeth Olten's life was stolen from her that truly horrifies people with the recent update in this case. In 2021, a new bill was passed in Missouri that gives any minor that was sentenced to life in prison a chance of parole after 15 years, which means Alyssa has a chance for parole in July of 2024, which is now. I'm putting this video up on July 1st, 2024. This bill obviously came with a lot of criticism and backlash, especially regarding Alyssa Bustamante. So a state representative actually made a statement saying that this bill was not created for minors that committed crimes like Alyssa, and that it should not and would not apply to her. Personally, I don't think that she has a chance of getting out anytime soon, if ever, but I guess we will have to wait and see. If you watched to the end of this video, thank you so much for listening to Elizabeth Olten's story. I feel like so often she's lost in her own case. So if you watch to the end, let me know, and let me know if you're still liking the longer videos we're doing. And I will see you guys tomorrow with 2 new videos.
I hate to use the comparison of saying that it sounds like a plot from a horror movie, because it's not a movie, it's real life, and that makes it 100 times worse. But when you listen to it, it really does sound like a real life scary movie. It was supposed to be 2 weeks of fun for the Girl Scouts. Instead, it turned into a triple homicide. With that being said, I have to say my usual warning. This video does involve children. If you think that listening to this is going to harm your mental health in any way, please skip this video, and I will see you in my next one. Take care of yourselves. I mean it. I love you. 8-year-old Lori Farmer lived in Oklahoma. She was the oldest. She had 4 younger siblings, and although she was obviously still very young, she played the role of an older sister better than anyone. She was caring, she was funny, she was smart, and she was very, very loved. The summer before going into 5th grade, Lori was signed up to attend a Girl Scout summer camp, Camp Scott. 9-year-old Michelle Guse was also from Oklahoma. She lived with her parents and her older brother. She has been described as a very athletic little girl. She loved the outdoors, she loved plants, and she loved, more than anything, spending time with her family. Michelle had attended Camp Scott the year prior, but in the summer of 1977, she was getting ready to go back for a second time. 10-year-old Doris Denise Milner lived in Oklahoma with her parents. She was the oldest daughter, and she adored her 5-year-old little sister more than anyone in this entire world. She has been described as a very playful girl who also was very academically smart. All three of those girls had plans to attempt Camp Scott the same summer in 1977. Lori was between two camps originally, but her mom suggested that she go to Camp Scott, and Denise had never been to camp at all. So she was overall very nervous to go away for the summer, but her mother was the one who encouraged her to go. Right before camp, Denise's little sister, who was only 5 years old, turned to her mother and asked her about death and what happens when you pass away. Her next statement would be her telling her mom that tomorrow, the very next day, everyone was going to pass away. Which is shocking when you realize that the very next day, her older sister, along with two other girls, would have their lives tragically ripped away from them. Camp Scott was located in the scenic hills of Mays County in Oklahoma. It had always been a popular destination for Girl Scouts for nearly 50 years. It was known as a peaceful, wholesome place where girls could go to enjoy nature, build friendships, and develop life skills through hiking, canoeing, and campfire activities. Families felt more than safe taking their daughters there, and the camp was cherished for its tradition, its tight-knit community, and its role in fostering independence and confidence in young girls. It was on an area of 410 acres and designed to hold 140 campers and 30 counselors. Before camp started in June, there was a training session held for the counselors in April, and something very significant happened there. After one of their training sessions, a counselor returned to her tent to find that her belongings had been ransacked and a box of donuts had been stolen. She also noticed a handwritten letter that was left. The note, in capital letters, said, quote, "We are on a mission to kill 3 girls in tent 1, end quote. Somebody had been inside of that tent with intent to leave what we can now consider a warning sign. Unfortunately so, the director of that camp session assumed that the note was a prank, so they threw it away and they didn't think about it again. Lori, Michelle, and Denise arrived on camp June 12th of 1977. There was a total of 130 girls, but those 3 girls were assigned to sleep in the same tent together. And their tent was the one that was closest to the bathrooms, but also the one that was farthest away from the counselor's tent. And the only tent that was invisible directly from the counselor's tent. It was blocked by the camp showers. It didn't take long at all for Lori, Michelle, and Denise to start creating a bond and a friendship. Within the very first night, they were laughing, singing songs, hanging out by the campfire together. One of the counselors there found it really sweet because she said that although individually those 3 girls were on the quieter side, together the 3 of them were just as loud and as lively as any of the other girls. That night, they were expecting a storm. There was a lot of rain and thunderstorms on the forecast. Before going to bed, those 3 girls wrote letters to their families to fill them in on how day 1 went for them. In her letter, Lori wrote, quote, "We're at the beginning of a storm and having a lot of fun. I've met 2 new friends, Michelle Goose and Denise Milner. I'm sharing a tent with them." In the note, she wrote about how it started raining, how they were all sitting in their tents writing letters and getting ready to go to sleep, and she ended it with, quote, "I couldn't wait to write. We're all writing letters now because there's hardly anything to do. With love, Lori," end quote. Michelle wrote her letter to her aunt. She also mentioned that it was storming that night and wrote, quote, "Me and my tent mates are in the last tent in our unit. My tent mates are Denise Milner and Lori Farmer. My room is in shades of purple. Love, Michelle," end quote. Denise's letter, on the other hand, was not as happy. Remember, she was the one that was nervous to go to camp in the first place. She wasn't sure about going, and she told her mom that she was anxious, but her mom told her to just go, try it out, and see. She told Denise that if she got to camp and she still didn't like it, all she had to do was call her and her mom would go and pick her up. Her letter read, quote, "Dear Mom, I don't like camp. It's awful. The first day it rained. I have 3 new friends named Glenda, Lori, and Michelle. Michelle and Lori are my new roommates. Mom, I don't want to stay at camp for 2 weeks. I want to come home and see Cassie and everybody," end quote. After writing their letters, Lori, Michelle, and Denise went to sleep just like all the other girls in their respective tent. But that night would be marked by a series of strange and unsettling events that, in hindsight, were terrifying signs to what would be discovered the next morning. At around 11 p.m., some counselors reported seeing flickering lights in the woods, lights that looked to be like flashlights. And some of them even said that they heard what sounded like footsteps in the woods, but claimed that the sounds were faint and pretty hard to hear due to the rain and the thunder. Closer to 1:30 a.m., a camper in a nearby unit recalled hearing a loud scream coming from the direction of the girls' tents, a scream followed by sudden silence. Another counselor has said that she heard what sounded like someone crying or someone moaning, but she described the noise to not really sound human nor like an animal. Specifically, she said she heard sounds of movement outside and a deep, unsettling groan, but because the noise stopped, she fell back asleep. Then, around 3 in the morning, another counselor saw a strange light moving through the woods. She got up briefly, but didn't see anyone when she tried to go check, so she eventually returned to sleep. And the last reported scream sounded like someone crying out for their mom, which is heartbreaking. And then it was complete silence, and eventually all the counselors fell back asleep. Around 6 a.m. the next morning on June 13th, a counselor by the name of Carla woke up early to go and take a shower. As she walked near the trail, near the girls' tent, something unusual caught her eye. There were 3 sleeping bags lying outside, side by side, about 150 yards away from the girls' tents. The sleeping bags seemed to be very randomly placed, but when Carla approached the first sleeping bag and unzipped it, she was met with a gruesome sight: the lifeless body of a young girl. She wasn't wearing anything and she was tied up. Camp staff were immediately alerted, and upon further inspection, they found that the other 2 sleeping bags also contained victims. All 3 girls, 8-year-old Lori Farmer, 9-year-old Michelle Goose, and 10-year-old Doris Milner, had been brutally murdered. Their bodies found covered in injuries, painting the horrifying picture of what those 3 girls went through. All 3 of them also showed signs of SA. The counselors notified the camp owners, and in an uncomfortable detail, the owners called their lawyers first before calling the police. When the police was called, it didn't take long for them to arrive. Sheriff Pete Weaver and other local law enforcement officers arrived, followed by OSBI, Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation agents. They were shown the 3 girls' bodies zipped in their sleeping bags, left near a trail not far away from their tent, and immediately it was clear to them that the girls were unalived elsewhere, likely inside of their tent, and then moved to where they would be eventually found. Inside the tent, investigators found red-stained mattresses, a partial footprint, duct tape, rope, and a red flashlight lens. The lens also had what looked to be like a partial fingerprint. The back flap of their tent had been cut open, indicating that someone entered the tent from behind. The cause of death was later ruled as blunt force trauma. As officers secured the area, campers were quietly evacuated, and officers did what they could to try and keep the panic to a minimum. The reactions of the girls' parents upon learning what had happened to their daughters were, as you can imagine, utter devastation, confusion, and disbelief. Lori's father was inconsolable when he found out what happened. He just collapsed to the ground. Denise's mother, that poor lady, she was overwhelmed with guilt. And of course, it wasn't her fault. Of course, no one could have predicted a horrific event such as this one. But remember, Denise did not want to go to camp, and it was her mother that encouraged her to go. And she encouraged her to go, believing really that it would be a good experience, but the guilt haunted her. These families were all facing unimaginable grief, but they were also turned into the center of a media firestorm and a painfully long investigation. It was awful. Once the campers had been evacuated, law enforcement began canvassing the wooded area, searching for all and any clues. By that afternoon, they had a massive search underway involving tracking dogs, helicopters, and hundreds of officers combing the woods. But despite the early efforts and the amount of evidence collected, the case would become one of the most haunting unsolved crimes in American history. The police were under immense pressure, and in the days and weeks following the discoveries of the girls' bodies, a combination of criminal history, physical evidence, and circumstantial factors led investigators to the same name. On the 10th day of the investigation, they announced that their primary suspect was a man named Jean Leroy Hart. There were a handful of reasons as to why they suspected this guy specifically, and very, very valid reasons at that. The first being because of his criminal background. Jean Hart was a convicted offender and kidnapper. In 1966, he had abducted and essayed 2 pregnant women, blindfolding them with duct tape and leaving them in the woods. For that, he was handed a 309-year sentence. The similarity of those crimes to what happened at Camp Scott, particularly the tying up of the victims, the essay, and the rule setting, immediately raised red flags for investigators, which brings us to reason number 2, the fact that he had escaped prison. At the time of this case, Jean had been on the run for 4 years, having escaped prison in 1973. He was considered very dangerous and had managed to avoid being captured by literally hiding out in the deep woods of Cookson Hills, which was very, very close to Camp Scott. He was legit hiding right by Camp Scott, living in a cave in the woods. Third, he had grown up in the area and he was familiar with the specific woods surrounding the camp. Locals whispered that he was the kind of person who was more than capable of living off-grid, essentially hiding in the woods, which he was, and that made the crime all that more plausible for someone with his background. Also, I didn't know exactly where to fit this in, but when he kidnapped and essayed those 2 pregnant women, he was described to have been making really weird and deep grunts, and at Camp Scott the night of the crimes, people said said to have heard weird and deep grunts that almost sounded animalistic, if you had to say. Actually, not animalistic. They said that it was weird grunts that didn't sound like a human or an animal, but the thought that that noise could have been this grown man literally makes me want to throw up. And the fourth reason was the physical evidence at the scene. Investigators found several pieces of physical evidence linking Jean to the scene. The biggest one being the cave they found nearby, where Jean had been reportedly hiding. In the cave, investigators found items that tied him to the camp, like duct tape matching the tape found at the scene of the crime, photos, newspaper clippings, and a pair of sunglasses that were stolen from a camp counselor. There was also a strand of hair found at the scene of the crime that was very likely Jean's, and a male DNA recovered at the scene of the crime that came back as likely belonging to a non-white male with type O blood, which matches Jean's description. Needless to say, they had plenty of evidence to find and arrest Jean Hart for the crimes that took the lives of those 3 victims. But in order to do so, they needed to find him, and the investigation in looking for Jean set off one of the largest manhunts in state history at the time. It was a 10-month manhunt that included hundreds of law enforcement officers and hundreds of volunteers combing through the rugged woods of Cookson Hills. But after those 10 long months, they found him. He was being sheltered and pretty much hidden by family and local Cherokee medicine men. But on April 6th of 1978, authorities were able to locate him and he was placed under arrest. As if they needed more evidence to tie him to the crimes, on him, when they found him, he had stolen items from Camp Scott, including a broken mirror and a pipe. He also looked at officers and said, quote, "You will never pin this on me," end quote. Jean's trial began March 19th of 1979, and his defense team tried to break down the prosecution's case piece by piece, and I hate to say it, but they were unfortunately doing a good job at presenting reasonable doubt. The jury deliberated for 5 minutes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 minutes, and when they returned, their verdict was not guilty. They stated the prosecution did not prove their case beyond reasonable doubt. Shocking and devastating. Jean Hart was sent back to prison because, remember, he still had 305 years to serve from his 308-year sentence, but only 2 years after his trial and after he was found not guilty, he collapsed and passed away from a heart attack at the age of 35. And that is where we're forced to leave it, with more questions than answers. 3 little girls, Lori, Michelle, and Denise, went off to summer camp and never returned home. And almost 5 decades later, their families still don't know exactly what happened that night in the dark woods of Camp Scott, and they never got the closure they so deserved. Yes, there was a trial. Yes, there was a suspect, but there was no conviction, no confession, no clear truth, just grief and the memory of those precious little girls kept alive by all those who loved and cared for them. Camp Scott shut down after that summer, and it has never reopened. I had heard of this case before, and I knew about Jean because I knew that there was a manhunt for the primary suspect. I did not know that he was found not guilty until I was actually researching this case, but my jaw was on the floor, and it's so frustrating and so unsettling and sad. But that is all I have for today's case. Thank you guys for spending time with me today and for listening to Lori, Michelle, and Denise's story. I hope you guys are having the best day. If not, go do something to make it the best day. Make somebody happy, and I will see you in my next video. Massive kiss on the forehead to every single one of you.
This is the story of Terry Robinson. 2010, Greenville, Mississippi. 24-year-old Terry has a 3-year-old son named Tristan Robinson, and she's currently pregnant with her second child. Now, Terry has been going through a hard time. She lost her job. Now she's living on welfare. On top of both of her baby daddies not being shit, Terry really didn't have no help. By 2011, she had gave birth to a baby girl. Now, she had a neighbor named Veronica who would help her with the children. Anytime Terry needed a break or if she wanted to do something, Veronica would watch the children, until Veronica moved out of the neighborhood and Terry was left alone. And if that wasn't bad enough, the father of the baby girl wanted a DNA test, and the results sent Terry into a deep depression. He was not the father. After that, Terry let herself go appearance-wise. She wanted to give the 2 children up for adoption, but Veronica talked her out of it. Her appearance got so bad it caught the attention of the pastor one Sunday morning at service. Terry even asked the church for help, and all they told her was, keep praying. The kids were fine. The kids were dressed good. It was Terry that was looking a mess. They just didn't know how far mentally gone she was. Several of Terry's neighbors reported that she will stand outside and tell everybody who walks by to get right with God. She will also yell that she is a sinner and the devil is in her. On March 2nd, 2011, Terry called several people she know asking them to come get her kids because she was not mentally stable, but nobody ever came. She put 3-year-old Tristan in the tub to bathe him, and when she took him out and dried him off, Terry started to hear voices telling her to put him in the oven. And that's what she did. She turned the oven on and placed the 3-year-old in it, and she held the oven door shut. When the oven door stopped moving, Terry went to grab flour and she sprinkled it over her baby girl's head. Now, they say that she was about to fry the baby, but she ended up changing her mind. When she realized what she had done, she had called the police. Now, when the police arrived, some officers could not stomach the scene. Some of them couldn't even stay in the apartment. Terry was taken in for questioning where her story changed several times. One story was her boyfriend did it and left, and she came home and found the baby in the oven. Another story was Tristan turned on the oven and climbed in himself. She eventually confessed and said the voices in her head made her do it. Her defense team pled insanity, which failed. Now, they do believe that she was mentally ill, but she knew what she was doing because you knew the lie. On April 11th, 2012, Terry Robinson was sentenced to life without parole. Now, what y'all think? Because she did cry out for help. Her daughter was put in the system after this, by the way. But she did cry out for help. But that's just, even being mentally ill, she still knew to lie. Doing that to your son is crazy to me. What y'all think?
Sit down. I'm just kidding. You can stand. Was that a little bit scary? I woke up feeling a little bit sassy this morning. A little bit silly. Do you ever wake up and think, I'm gonna be a little bit of a problem today? It's kind of fun though. Anyway, that was the intro, I guess. Let's get into it. Samantha Walford, she was one of 3 children. She was the oldest, and she was only 19 years old when she found out news that would change her life. She was pregnant, but not only pregnant, she was pregnant with twins. It was a shock. It was unexpected. It definitely was not planned, but Samantha always had a motherly instinct about her, and she was really excited to become a mom. Even though she wasn't expecting it this soon, she was really excited about this new chapter in her life. The baby's father was her high school boyfriend, and he stuck around for 5 minutes, and then that relationship kind of fizzled out, leaving Samantha as a single mother. One of her favorite hobbies was social media, specifically YouTube. She loved making YouTube videos, and family members have said that she expected to quote unquote become famous. She had aspirations to become an influencer, I guess you could say. Most of her content was day-to-day content. She often spoke about her personal life as a young mom. In 2008, she would meet a guy at a tattoo shop who instantly caught her attention, Ernest Lee Ibarra Jr., who his friends and family referred to as Ernie. Ernie was from Texas, and he's been described as the kind of person that you could always count on. If you needed anything, Ernie was there, no matter what it was. He was selfless, he loved helping people, and he did so without ever expecting anything in return. He was also very smart. He was really good with computers. I believe he actually went on to go study technology at school because he was that good at it, but also very passionate about it. So Samantha and Ernie meet in 2008. They hit it off, and they get into a relationship right away. And Samantha and the twins eventually move in with Ernie, and they just become this happy little family of 4. Samantha started talking about Ernie a lot in her YouTube videos because she was the kind of person that was super open. She had no issues talking about her personal life with strangers. She shared basically anything and everything. Although for Ernie, putting his personal business out on the internet was not his favorite thing to do, which I can understand. He just wasn't the type that wanted his business out online, but Samantha was, and that was something that the two of them had a really hard time being aligned on. Ernie really stepped up as a father figure for the twins, and he was happy to. He saw so much potential in their little family, and he grew to love the twins as if they were his own. They started dating in 2008. In 2011, Samantha and Ernie found out that they were pregnant, and Samantha gave birth to another set of twins. Their little family of 4 quickly became a family of 6. And it goes without saying that kids are expensive. 1 kid is expensive, let alone 4, and growing from 4 to 6 people in the household, Samantha and Ernie had to figure out how they were going to financially support their family. Ernie was working multiple jobs. He spent more time out working than he did at home, and it got to a point where it was like okay, he was doing what he could, but the kids were getting a little bit older. Samantha had more free time on her hands, and the conversation came up of Samantha now doing something like getting a job to help out financially. And that's when she decided to start taking social media a little bit more seriously, doing what she could to start monetizing from her YouTube channel, which was more than ideal for her because one, she was very passionate about it and she liked to do it. And two, she could do it from home. It was kind of the perfect job for her, and Ernie was supportive of it because he was supportive of Samantha, but his personal business being out on the internet was never going to be his favorite thing. He was never going to like it. It also felt like the more Samantha focused on growing her YouTube channel, the less she did with the kids and around the house. Anything that she did for views, it felt like. And that included what she did with the kids. It was more so, how can I record my kids and use it for entertainment to post on social media versus I actually care to spend quality time with my children. Social media became her priority, and she put that above the kids. She put that above taking care of the household, cleaning up, doing chores. All of that was kind of put on the back burner, but someone had to do it. So who did it? Ernie. He kind of had to do everything around the house on top of already working multiple jobs to try and make ends meet. Referring to Samantha, Ernie's sister has said, quote, she felt like this was going somewhere. She kind of started paying less attention to her kids and she acted like her so-called job was more important than that. She wanted to be internet famous. My brother didn't like that kind of thing, end quote. Ernie's thing though that he did like to do was gaming. He liked to play games online, but that was something that Samantha didn't like. So the two of them often argued about their hobbies. Neither of them liked what the other person did and the amount of time that they would dedicate to said hobbies, and it created a lot of tension between them. It got to a point where Ernie was exhausted, not only emotionally but also physically probably, and it became too much for him and he left. That didn't really last long, however, because he really did love his family. He saw Samantha wasn't really having much success online and noticed that that was taking a toll on her, so he moved back in to give it another go. He didn't want to give up on them quite yet. And then in 2013, at 24 years old, Samantha fell pregnant again, only with one kid this time, not twins, but their family was now a family of 7. Not long after that, Samantha and Ernie decided to get married. In the early hours of February 19th, 2025, Samantha's mother, Rosie, received a frantic phone call from Samantha. She sounded terrified on the phone. She's freaking out. She's telling her mom that in the middle of the night, 3 men broke into the house when they were sleeping. She says that they ripped her off the bed, tied her up. The men then started attacking Ernie, and then they took him. They kidnapped him. He was gone. Rosie, on the phone listening to this, is terrified for her daughter, as any mother would be, and she called her sister Ginger, who lived nearby. Ginger rushed over to their house as fast as she could, and she found Samantha upstairs. She was with her hands tied behind her back, and her feet were also tied. The kids, however, were still sound asleep in their bedrooms. Actually, they were all in one bedroom together, sleeping in the same room. Officers from the Titus County Sheriff's Department were called, and they arrived shortly after. As authorities searched the home, they noticed that no valuables were taken, although Samantha said that it was a break-in, but it seemed like they didn't steal anything. They just bursted through the doors, took Ernie, and then left. Another weird thing, Samantha called her mother after everything, right? And she told her that she had been tied up. When Ginger arrived, Samantha was still tied up. Her hands were tied. So Ginger says, wait a minute, how did you manage to, 1, get your phone, and 2, dial your mom if your hands were tied up? And Samantha kind of dismisses the question, but then says she was able to dial the phone with her nose. Kind of weird. That's a little bit weird. Samantha was brought into the police station for questioning. She claimed that her and Ernie were asleep when the 3 men broke into the house, and she again told them the stories of the events of that night. She said that sometime after 1 a.m., she was startled by someone jerking the blankets off of her. She said one of the attackers had a weapon in hand, held it to her throat as the others were dragging Ernie downstairs and attacking him. Afterwards, she said they dragged her downstairs as well. This is a quote from her. It reads, quote, they had me on my knees, forcing him to look at me. It was like they were using me like some kind of taunting factor, and they were punching him in the face with a... Samantha said that Ernie was removed from the house as she was taken upstairs and bound, and after they were gone and she thought that she was saved, she wiggled over to her phone and called her mother with her nose. She claimed that the 3 men were wearing masks that covered their entire faces and baggy clothing. But investigators are thinking, the math isn't mathing, something isn't making sense here. The crime scene looked to be staged, if anything. There were also no signs of forced entry. Nothing was stolen. Samantha was somehow able to grab her phone and make the call when she was tied up. The kids were all still sound asleep despite the apparent chaos. And they were all sleeping in the same room, which was weird in itself. And then, as they're continuing to ask her questions, they ask her about the events of the day leading up to the attack, what she was doing, who she was with, where she was, just overall what she was up to that day. Samantha claimed that she was at a hospital visiting one of her friends who just had a baby. And then in the middle of the interview, Samantha pauses and she has an epiphany. She looks at investigators and says, there's this guy that I met yesterday at the hospital. His name is Johnny. He could have done this. Samantha claimed that she met him at the hospital when she was visiting her friend. Johnny was actually her friend's boyfriend, and Samantha said that he heard her talking about how Ernie didn't treat her well, and apparently that made Johnny very angry. So angry, in fact, that he offered to quote unquote take care of Ernie for her to make sure that he didn't mistreat her again. This Jonathan guy apparently told Samantha that him and his brother-in-law, 26-year-old Jose, could take care of Ernie for her. Authorities learn more about this Johnny guy, realize that his name is actually Jonathan Kyle Sanford. They also learned that he had just recently been released from prison, so they go and arrest him immediately, and they're like, come in for questioning, dude, what happened? And Johnny, to their surprise, says, oh yeah, that was me. It was me with the help of my brother-in-law Jose and our friend 28-year-old Octavius. He helped us too. And authorities are like, okay, why? And Johnny says, oh, well, I did meet Samantha at the hospital and she was talking about how awful Ernie was to her, and I did offer to get him out of the picture, but Samantha wanted me to. She came up with this whole plan with us. She knew exactly what was going to happen and she helped us do it. Johnny tells investigators that originally they only intended to plant substances in Ernie's truck to then set him up to get caught so that he would go to prison and be out of the picture that way. But then on the night of February 19th, Johnny, Samantha, and Octavius and her children were also in the car. They were driving around together in Octavius's car to go and buy some substances, and while they were all hanging out together having a blast, at some point they decided that ending Ernie's life would maybe be easier. It just sounded like the better option to them because then he would be out of the picture forever. I think ending his life was the men's idea, but they told Samantha, if you want us to end it all, leave the front door unlocked the night of the crime so they could walk in and take Ernie. But if you don't want us to do that, lock the front door so then we know that all you want us to do is stay outside and plant the substances in his trunk. But it was kind of like, the ball is in your court. You leave that door unlocked and we will take it from there. And the night of the crime, Samantha left the front door unlocked. So the three men arrived. They saw the front door was unlocked. They went inside. They grabbed Ernie, took him to a remote area in a neighboring county where they attacked him further until they took the weapon and Jose fired it in the back of Ernie's head, ending his life. And that is what happened, and that is why the children were all sleeping in the same room together. So if need be, Samantha could control them and keep them all in one place so their plan didn't get messed up. To further minimize the chances of any of the 5 kids waking up, Samantha gave them some sort of her own medication that she was prescribed for her insomnia so they would not wake up. Oh, we also find out that Samantha did make the call to her mom while the men were still inside the house and before they tied her up to make everything look staged. Can you imagine? You let these 3 men inside your house to take your husband. They take your husband. They're getting ready to stage this break-in and to tie you up, and you say, hang on a minute, let me make a quick phone call. I'm just going to call my mom, pretend that I need help, and then you can tie me up. Okay, great. So all of this is what Johnny is telling the police. This is their first time hearing this. Police ask Johnny if he can take them to Ernie's body to confirm that his story is true, and Jonathan does. He takes them to the exact location where Ernie's body was. They also found incriminating text messages between Octavius and Samantha, once again proving that Johnny was telling the truth. Jonathan, Jose, and Octavius are all arrested and charged with the murder of Ernie. Investigators go back to the interrogation room where Samantha is still being questioned, and they tell her everything that they just found out. They confront her. They say, we know you're a liar. We know exactly what happened. We know that you were not only aware, but also involved. It's time to quit your little lying game and come clean. And Samantha gets super defensive and says, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know anything. I didn't do anything. She couldn't confess, but ultimately she was also arrested and charged with murder. Samantha Walford went to trial for the murder her husband Ernie Ibarra in September of 2017. She pled not guilty, but she was found guilty and received a 99-year prison sentence to be served consecutively with a 50-year sentence for kidnapping. Jonathan and Jose pled guilty in April of 2016, and they were each sentenced to 50 years in prison. Octavius pled not guilty, so he went to trial and was found guilty on all counts, receiving a combined 93 prison sentence. The million-dollar question, what was the motive? Well, a lot of people think that Samantha was doing this for attention, that she wanted something tragic to happen in her life to get sympathy from the public and in result become the famous person that she wanted to be on social media. What a plan, my girl, what a plan. Let me just end the life of my husband, traumatize my children so that I could get a big following. anyway, that is all I have for today's video. I've been getting a lot of Instagram requests from you guys to do cases, and I was reading through them last night. There are so many intriguing cases in there that I'm definitely going to put on my list to research and cover. But yeah, that's all from me. Thank you guys for spending time with me today. I hope you guys are having the best day. If not, go do something to make it the best day. Make somebody happy, and I will see you in my next video. Massive kiss on the forehead to every single one of you.
The body of Gwen Brunel has officially been found 10 months after she mysteriously disappeared, in less than 2 miles from where her car was found abandoned. This is everything we know so far. On June 26, 2023, Gwen disappeared while on a solo road trip from her home in Boise, Idaho to California. She told her family and friends that she was meeting up with a nationally recognized rabbit judge in a small town near Fresno, but she never made it. The trip seemed really sudden to her family, but Gwen seemed really excited to show some of her show rabbits. She was an expert in raising purebred rabbits, and she loved them so much. She even won a lot of awards and was nationally recognized. So Gwen packed up her car with some extra clothes, 3 cages filled with 11 of her show rabbits, and about a week's worth of food and water for them. She promised her dad she would keep in touch, but no one heard from her again after she left her house, and soon after her phone was shut off. Gwen was then spotted at a convenience store about 20 miles from her home, but what's odd is that she was seen on security footage wearing different clothing from when she left her house. What's also odd is that the store was only 20 miles from her home, yet it took her 3 hours to get there, and no one knows what she was doing in the meantime. Gwen was officially last seen at around noon in Jordan Valley, Oregon, 1 day later at a Sinclair gas station. She stopped for gas and then went across the street to buy snacks at Mrs. Z's convenience store. Gwen told an employee that she was in a hurry, but she then spent the next hour in her car in the parking lot not moving, which worried the employee. So the employee asked if Gwen was okay, and she told them that she was fine, but she completely vanished after this, and she was reported missing that same day. Her car was found abandoned 4 days later near Sucker Creek Road in Malheur County. All 4 windows were partially opened, and her keys and all of her personal belongings were left inside the car. Also left in the car were all 11 of her rabbits, but sadly at this point, 5 of them had died because of the heat. A massive search was launched in the area near where her car was found, on foot, on horseback, using drones, UTVs, and even cadaver dogs, but no trace of Gwen was found. The search for Gwen was officially called off on July 10th, but 2 months later, on September 10th, her t-shirt was found tangled up in a barbed wire fence near Dog Creek. Her boots were found shortly after, about 80 yards from her shirt, and this was all less than 2 miles from where her car was found abandoned. Even with these new clues, police at the time said there were no signs of an abduction, and they believed that she may have just wandered off into the rangeland somewhere. Gwen's family did mention that she took medication for certain mental conditions that would sometimes make her moody and inattentive, so this did make them question whether or not she was experiencing a mental health crisis. There would be no updates in Gwen's case until April 8th of this year, 10 months after she went missing. Gwen's family hired a drone operator who began looking for her by taking video footage of the area where her car was found and of the areas that hadn't been searched on foot. This aerial footage covered more than 4,000 acres in the region, and this footage was then given to an organization called Aloft Drone Search. This company used image analyzing software to examine the footage, which picked up on possible remains. The images and coordinates were then given to authorities who went to the location where they found and recovered Gwen's body. After comparing the remains to dental records, it was confirmed that the body belonged to Gwen. Her exact cause of death is still being determined, but according to her family, they don't believe foul play is suspected. What's incredibly sad is that her body was found in an open range area just 2 miles from where her car was found abandoned nearly a year ago. It was just outside of the search area. What's heartbreaking is that Gwen's dad said he came so